We've finally reached the end of our Gunvolt games as of now. X2 has finally released and I spent days grinding away at it trying to form an opinion. I didn't look much at pre-release stuff, but now that I have the game in my hands I can't help but have a lot to say about it. So how about we saw right through these pleasantries and start our review of Gunvolt Chronicles Luminous Avenger X2. So, what do you do when you've beaten the bad guy and you finally obtained peace? That's right, after killing Demerzel, we also defeated outstanding racism as well. So what do? Well, we tinker with weird things we find on the ground, of course. Copen has found a strange blaster rifle that doesn't seem to be from his world. Kohaku tells him to take a break, but before he can, a wormhole opens up and it sucks him, Lola, and Kohaku, dropping them off into a barren wasteland of a world where humans have gone extinct and the only ones left are worker droids trying to restore the planet to something habitable. The three are found by a worker known as Null, and after several months stranded, Copen makes his way to a large tower in the middle of a desert to find answers on how to return home. And that's where our game starts us. Our intro stage is the desert. Sporting a brand new look, the only thing Copen is missing is a cape to throw away, but someone else has got that covered. Along with his new look comes a brand new ability for this game. Pervasion is a thing of the past. Now Lola has a healing ability that she can use at any time. The price is cashing in your kudos you've gained and resetting your combo score to 0. But that's not the only, or dare I say biggest change of the game. As you run through the stage, you'll notice that Copen no longer carries his laser gun. He's turned that random rifle he found into a new saw-bladed weapon for melee-focused ground combat. You can hold the saw out for an active hurt box, you have a 3-hit combo that brings out a giant wheel that can even block some projectiles, and you even have a ground dash attack. Your ground dash is even able to push back blocks and enemies to give yourself some room. So you might be asking, where did his old gameplay go? It's still here, but you have to work for it. Copen still has his lock-on tags normally, but this time they only work while he's in the air, and he does get his old homing shots back, but you might notice that Copen can only air dash once, no matter what. He can still bound off walls, but in open areas he becomes pretty vulnerable in the air. To return Copen back to his old self, you need to reach 1,000 kudos, and he'll have a similar system to when he did before. Bullets are gone and are replaced by a meter that slowly drains after your first hit, taking away chunks with each dash you perform, but refills after hitting any surface or enemy like in the old games. There aren't any alternate difficulties in this game, so no matter what, you won't be losing kudos when you take a hit in normal play, so in theory it's easier to reach 1,000 than ever before. And that in essence breaks down your way of play. Grounded combat with break shift in your razor wheel, and after hitting 1,000 kudos, aerial combat with your bullet shift in your homing blades. If you're like me, you probably haven't come to terms with this by the time you've reached the first boss, but maybe forging on ahead, things will become a little bit clearer. You find this old busted up robot in front of the tower, but it suddenly comes to life and has a strong resemblance to someone. I can't put my finger on it, but he is a pushover all the same. After the battle, we find out that Kohaku and Null have followed us, and the tower seems to magically open up at the presence of Kohaku. Seeing as everyone is already here, they take a walk inside and we've now reached our gameplay loop. We may have gotten into this tower pretty easily, but it seems that if we want to go up, we'll have to find 2 sets of keys. So it's time to pick our stages and fight our bosses for them. You only get 2 picks at the start, making things kind of barren for our options, but our stages are more varied than ever. This tower is full of biorooms that replicate many different environments. Our first two options are between a volcano block that rushes you to the end with giant boulders and hot molten. If it still appears in a cave, does that turn into lava or is it still magma? What technically counts as the Earth's crust? Anyway, our other location is the jungle block, full of beautiful waterfalls and vines that impede your path forward. But getting to keys is simple and we have to make our way up the tower. On foot, because God forbid someone put an elevator in this place. We have to make sure that the patch is safe for Kohaku and Null, so Copen and Lola go through first, but are stopped just before the end by that odd robot we met outside. Ypsilon. Blah blah blah, I will surpass you, blah blah blah, how could I lose, blah blah blah, mother! And he's gone. Weird how he can talk now, still reminds me of somebody. Anyway, after all of that, we get another door, oh boy. So before we run through the next set of bosses, let's talk about our home. We aren't home anymore, are we? Let's talk about the tower menu. The basic menu has been cleaned up, mission and talk are where you expect them to be, but music has been moved over here as well. All of your subroutines and main options are in the start menu at all times now. You can check on and set shortcuts for your EX weapons, you can buy and set your subroutines, they even have this fun graphic for your overdrive ones. They still work on just buying them with the credits that you earned in the game like last time, so make sure you pick up the ones such as draws in dropped enemy credits to you and gives credits based on your completion rank. Also the Boomeraiser. You can check your stats. Your health increase is a subroutine this time that's on from the beginning, so if you want to run the game with low health, you can do so just by turning it off. Our main options are pretty much the same. You have a manual telling you how to do all of your moves and how scoring works, basically doing my job for me. You can set your display settings like resolution, and I'm assuming only a PS5 and Steam function, you get to set your FPS options to 60 or 120. Don't have a 120 monitor, game won't let me see it. You can set your buttons in-game, but a big difference is that you can technically map them twice. You can change what they do in-game, or you can change how your controller interprets them. I'm playing on Steam this time, so it might just be a Steam feature, but who's to say on this one? The hover subroutine turned into an option this time, so it's now moved to the option menu. I recommend turning it off. Even after playing through the whole game with it on, it felt way better to have it off when I went through the second time. You can also change the air dash options. I don't really know what this one does. I feel like I was able to do most of the things I wanted in both modes, which included an air dash with multiple angles. But that might have happened after I made the switch originally, and Gunvolt 2 says more precise, so that's the one I went with. You finally have sound settings in there, kinda... You can set the volume for everything comparatively, but you can't silence any of them, so... For someone like me, this still would make editing easier, but I don't have any of the music this time, so... At least you can hear dialogue better, I guess. And speaking of dialogue, we have our first ever English voiceover cast for this game series, and it's good.
A secret room?
I guess. I'm not the type of person who cares about things like this, but some people do, so I'm glad they got it. More than that, I'm glad they did a really good job. Special shoutouts to Yuma Uchida and Alejandro Saab, who are respectively the Japanese and English voices of both Copen and Ypsilon. Anytime someone has to do double duty on the same voice but different, it's always a fun time to see. Or listen. And with that out of the way, we can get back to beating up bosses. We have the laboratory block that is full of lasers that we can use our buzzsaw to turn off some of them and outrace the other ones. We have the industrial block that is full of spikes and explosives in many different varieties. An arctic block that has harsh winds, slippery floors, and more spikes. And finally, a space block that has lowered gravity, meaning you can just skip most of it if you feel like it. I'm kidding. Mostly. They know well enough to put you into closed, tight spaces. Most of the time. As we go through these levels, we get a bit more character and plot. You find out that every robot is born with a mission, or a duty that they have to fulfill, but Null doesn't seem to have one of those, and it causes her a bit of melancholy. Ypsilon goes and wakes up his mother, Computer, who has been in sleep mode this whole time. It seems the arrival of Kohaku has put more than the tower back in motion, and Mother is very interested in her. After collecting all of our keys and unlocking our way up once again, Ypsilon ambushes us and steals Kohaku away, adding another thing to do before we can get back home. Since we're nearing the end, let's talk about our EX weapons for a half second. I'm not the type to really go into Mega Man-esque EX weapons, special weapons. because at the end of the day I end up trying to use most of them myself throughout my run, and I do generally like all of them. They all have different functions and utilities, and some are outright broken. I can't believe they brought back a time slow mechanic in this day and age. The big change to your EX weapons in this game, however, is that they have their own weapon meters. I like this, but I kinda wish that they'd still refuel even if they weren't selected. They could've just, I don't know, increased the refuel time if they aren't on immediately. But that being said, we really don't have much to do. We have one lead-up stage that uses all the tricks of the previous stages, and that kind of kicks off our boss rush, but not really. Damn, it really is 0-2 in here, isn't it? Then you have your rematch with Ypsilon, the real boss rush, and then your final climactic battle with the mother computer. If this recap seems a little shorter and less messed up stuff is happening, it's because this game just came out and I'm unwilling to spoil it for you. That's what timestamps are for. Now, it's not like there's much to spoil with this story. Its plot is a tool so we can have our varied stages, but it's weird because we get transported to this whole other world that has nothing to do with anything and we just run up this tower. The stage artist really got to show off this time, but I feel like the writing is a bit more honed in as it always is. I have nothing to say about the bosses because they all have the same purpose, but with quirky personalities. There's a whole revenge bit thing that rings kinda hollow when you fight the two in question again later. Lots of connections that just seem kinda hollow. Anyway, it has the same needlessly graphic moments, hollow twists, everything that you've seen before. We can cut back in now because I find it funny that people aren't feeling this story this time around because its shallowness is worn on its sleeves a bit more, but it's pretty much standard fare for the series as a whole. To put things in perspective, we open up with the phrase, Copen has obtained peace, and it's not ironic in any way, shape, or form. The plot was gone at frame 1. No one had an actual character arc that needed a continuation. There's no bad guy that could have been waiting in the background of that last plot either. I was on board for some lighthearted nonsense, and that's what this game gave me. The game's saving grace is that it isn't a mess like Gunvolt 2, and it doesn't undercut itself like X1, even if I like that story just a bit more. It does, however, do something different that I think is kind of annoying. This game, like the main Gunvolt series, has a secret true ending. Much like Gunvolt 1, it hides its secret ending behind its collectibles, the emblems. Then there's the secret area in the final mission that is real annoying part because it's a hole in the wall that is hard to find, and through that you have to unlock and beat hard mode to get it. More on hard mode later. For now, let's talk about art and presentation. They really went all in on this game. Because of its setting, or maybe the other way around, the art design gets to be way more varied. You have all of these different locations with excellent art and backgrounds. Colors, once again, 10 out of 10. Cut-ins are now animated. The screen has been pulled out just slightly to give you more sight of things ahead of you. Aesthetically, this game is like a mix between Mega Man X4 and 0-2, and that is not a bad choice. The music is once again just as good as always. The stage themes are energetic and fun, and while I wasn't all that into the idol songs when they were first posted on NT Create's YouTube channel, they play way better in game and I've come around on them quite a lot. In the last video, this is pretty much where I gave my verdict on the game and went off into game design and what I liked about it. I can't do that this time because of the big changes to this game, and while some of them are interesting, I feel like a lot of them have their own problems and feel like they don't really understand what worked well in the previous game. So this section probably matters the most, but I will speak out on something that I've noticed. If you're the type of person that enjoys that tactile feeling of your button presses doing immediate damage, you might just like this game the most in this series. It's a shame that the first area in the game can easily show off all of my issues, but here we are. So first off is taking damage. Second is moving through levels with your air dash. Third is getting points. And fourth is your razor wheel. So basically criticisms with the entire game. This is going to be a lot, so let's start off with our first problem the game presents us with, and that is free healing. I think this is a step too far for getting casuals into this game. It may bank your kudos to keep you from your aerial mode, but it really takes away the idea of learning in this game and puts all of the weight completely on if you care about your points or not. For Gunvolt the character, Prevasion was always a way of switching between offense and defense and becoming vulnerable to taking damage for the sake of doing damage, but for Copen it always worked in his offensive favor. Prevasion was a safety net, but it still had its holes in it for you to take damage that mattered. In Gunvolt 2, you had ways to heal yourself, but not in the original Ix. You had to rely on health pickups, which aren't in this game at all, but the healing checkpoint system did make a return. So while taking damage really doesn't matter all that much in stages still, in the original Ix, you still had to sit with that damage during bosses in your base toolkit. Even if you could keep recharging through attacks, you still had to be aware of what was going on. That's not the case for this game, where the only thing you really have to pay attention to is your health bar. Now that I think about it, this invalidates the level up system entirely. This gets even more out of hand when you include the Hyper Guard subroutine that makes Copen take only 1 point of damage when he is standing completely still. All of these systems just reduce the normal defensive form of gameplay into not interacting with the game at all. Next, let's talk about how air dashing was changed. You can only air dash once in this game until you reach 1000 kudos and you enter overdrive. One of the criticisms that I often hear with Copen is that his air dashes made it feel like you didn't interact with the stages enough. That this game holding you back is forcing you to interact with the stages more, but I don't agree with any of those criticisms at all. Copen having one air dash just means I need to jump a bit more than I did in the previous game to move through the levels and not care about their stage design. Like all of Copen's gameplay since he was first introduced, Copen interacts with the level the most when he is forced into tight, confined spaces, and his air dash is at its best when it's extremely vertical in level design. Something this game still does, so I don't see why they hold you back as much as they do. In fact, the game goes out of its way to discourage locking onto targets outside of overdrive so much that it's worthless to tag unless you really have to. That's why I recommended turning off auto hover. It just leaves you in a vulnerable state that has zero advantages, and the press of the jump button can be the difference between getting hit or not. I can get holding Copen back, but they should have at least let you chain together enemy air dashes. So now let's move on to talking about getting into overdrive bullet shift mode the first place, so let's talk about the point system. So all of your normal basic attacks will give you points. Anything you do with your razor wheel, any of your homing shots, they will net you normal points. But the fastest way to get to 1000 points is with your razor bonus. It's activated by killing enemies in quick succession with your normal razor wheel, whether it's the hold, a dash attack, or your 3-hit combo. As long as you aren't locked on, it will count towards that bonus. EX weapons do nothing for your base score, but they do grant you a 20-point aerial bonus when you're locked on, which is 10 points better than your normal aerial lock-on bonus. When you do eventually unlock your overdrive, your aerial bonuses can be comboed and stacked just like in the last game, gradually increasing as you keep comboing without touching the ground. So the real problem is that your razor bonus sucks. It's a set 30 points that is based on an invisible timer that counts down from kill to kill. Playing through the first time, I had no idea why I'd get it sometimes, and other times I didn't. I'd like some indicator under your kudos bonus for the timing. But the thing that frustrates me the most is that the old EX aerial bonus is so obviously better, but is locked behind until you reach overdrive in the first place. If your razor bonus is going to be timed, how about you give that an increased combo bonus as well? Getting 1000 points in stage isn't that difficult because the emblems work as they did before, 500 points each. Oddly, the 1000 point bonus is missing, but for what it's worth, it does become a problem later on. Finally, we come to the razor wheel itself. It's too damn slow and too short range to be all that useful. It's not that bad one-on-one in levels because the second hit of your combo pushes back a little bit, but for more than one enemy, or when the enemy is close enough, or they have a ranged option, or when they have something that lets them move in, it's very clumsy. Your third hit may be able to block some projectiles, but that once again puts you in a situation where you can't move. I really don't see why they give you an active hitbox just for holding it out. It's used for one level gimmick and only works on one enemy, so it all feels like a weird justification for it. I don't understand why there's so much ending lag for the last hit of your combo. You can deal with the range a bit with the Boomer Razor that gives you a nice ranged option, but now we're back at Gunvolt territory where some of your subroutines should be in your base abilities. Writing this out, I think I can also say that for the credit subroutines too. But I think the absolute worst thing for your razor wheel is that it's practically useless on most of the bosses in this game. How can the main way the game pushes you to attack during the level be your worst option in your bosses? It's not even like Overdrive is a better alternative either, because the boss design of these fights hasn't changed from the first game. Every boss has an air option that is easier to handle when you're on the ground. And going back to level design, that also includes enemy placement, which is still the exact same as last time as well. Enemies are stretched apart horizontally and vertically, perfect for air dashing back to back, and awful for your base razor wield. I feel like time slow was added to make your razor wheel worth using, and in raw damage per second, it is, but it isn't enough to matter for casual players, and not polished enough to be a main option either way. I feel like they made these changes just for the sake of change itself without thinking them through enough. I think a melee option is fine, but it needs to be useful in boss fights. It needs to let you be able to move freely in these speedy and hectic battles. Taking away multiple air dashes needs to actively hold you back in a way that matters, but still supports a natural playstyle. I see all of these places where I could have an option in the last game, but it just isn't here in this one unless I'm halfway through the level and I've played well enough up to that point. So this is the part where I talk about difficulty, and that's a hard subject to get into. Everyone has their own views on what's difficult or too easy, and it gets kinda messy, but I can at least talk about the things that I don't like about this game's hard mode. I don't like the removal of gameplay mechanics and abilities and level ups. I can get removing infinite healing, that makes sense, but I don't like the fact that it also removes your subroutines. If you're able to get 1000 kudos in hard mode that removes all of the emblems in the stage, you deserve to be rewarded more than just a bullet chip that isn't even useful on bosses, which is the only thing that is really difficult in them in the first place. It would give you a reason to try and interact with the stages so you can give yourself an easier time with the boss with the overdrive buffs that you normally get, and if they wanted more challenge, they could mitigate their effects instead of just removing them outright. It also removes the idea of leveling up, so it doesn't even matter in this mode either, so what's the point? It also removes the incentive to get all of your upgrades in normal mode because you've most likely only gotten about 5 out of the 20ish number that is there in the first place, and they don't really help you learn the game any better like in the last game where they just made things easier for you, so what's the point in those two? The only real incentive of hard mode is to see the story and maybe look at the hard mode bosses. I think the biggest issue for me is that hard mode still gives you lives. That's not a form of difficult to me. That's not difficult, it's a punishment. Those things aren't the same in my eyes. Lives just get in the way of you learning to handle the part in games that is actually giving you trouble. So a way to break their system is to go back to the space block. It has the easiest extra lives to get, and 2 of them being pretty easy and another one hiding behind an EX weapon spot with the Gatling gun. So once you get the lives, you can exit the stage and it will be saved and kept until you lose one and the game saves again. You can farm here, and if you can get all of them, you can hit retry and farm as much as you want. Retry eats up one of your lives, but you will be getting 2 at a higher rate. Make sure not to hit restart. Restart just starts you off with whatever lives that you currently have until you reach lower than 2, in which it will just go back to 2. But whenever you've gained as many lives as you want, whenever you reached a challenge and you're about to run out of them, just exit out of the game without saving from the start menu and go back to the title screen from there. That's just a workaround for a problem that doesn't need to exist in the first place, and something I didn't know about before I beat it, so I wasted a lot of my time. At the end of the day, you still have a problem of wasting your time. My biggest frustration with hard mode is that it makes X's 1 learning curve feel like a fluke in terms of game design. And yeah, I get that that can happen sometimes, but it stings, you know? This hard mode is essentially a modified version of X1's score attack mode, but the score attack mode didn't modify anything. You could run through the stage normally and practice score attack in a multitude of ways to make yourself ready for it. The only thing score attack in the last game hit for me were boss fight missions, but this one just gives you them outright to practice on, but the bosses are modified in hard mode, so there's not much practice to be had in the first place. The game can't expect me to practice on old bosses when they have new modified moves and just sub them in myself mentally. Right? A sneaky double attack makes sense, sure, that's fine, but sometimes they just punk you out because you know the old boss fight well enough that they get a cheap shot in on the new one, and that's annoying. Some of these new boss fights are just annoying. Why does Ypsilon remove my reticle from him? That's the only way I can attack. That's not hard, that's just frustrating. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm great at video games. After this past week, I wouldn't even say that I'm good at video games. But I did manage to get an X rank on the normal Ypsilon boss fight. It took me another 30 minutes to even beat the hard mode version of that boss, and that is just a boss stage. It took me hours to beat the final boss that has a short stage that only takes seconds, and a 2-phase boss fight on top of that. The live system is just there to shoot your nerves and mess with your muscle memory. Putting the learning curve aside, I feel like the last game was the best of Gunvolt in where you can set your own difficulty with your own stipulations. In this game you can kinda do that, but the two modes that you have are a super easy mode where you can heal all you want, and that is a skill that is never able to be turned off, or a hard mode where you have absolutely no options at all, and that's sad. There's no real middle ground, because if you play the game without healing, then you realize, oh wait, this game's actually pretty hard though. Just saying something bad is the lowest form of criticism, and the step above that is breaking down why you think something is bad. But leaving it at that isn't as satisfying as it could be, so if you're going to break something down, you should have to give something to help build it back up again. Not to say that I can design a video game, but having more ideas is better than having none. So here are some hawk recommendations. Also, like, you can use some of these for Gunvolt 3, like, don't take me back to Gunvolt 2, don't make me have to synthesize items again, I don't want to do that, you fixed it. As a core design feature, bring back the kudos modes, or at least some form of them through subroutines like you already have in the game. If you don't want everything to matter but points, make them actually different levels with like a limited healing on Gutless, Pervasion on Caution, and nothing for Fearless, right? Do something like that. Again, if that's too much, find a way to work it into the subroutine system like you already have with some of them. Let Copen dash again after hitting an enemy. Without that, his air dash feels kinda useless in normal stages and enemies. I think the level design is fine as it is, rewarding you for better play, but some of them can be a bit too open, like the gravity stage in the beginning. The Razor Wheel is too slow and clunky to use, its range is too short for how fast some of the enemies move. Movement options outside of it are not quick enough, and it's worthless for these highly mobile and aerial bosses. I used the Razor Wheel in normal stages not because I wanted to, but because I had to, and it wasn't fun. Just go all in on emulating the Z-Saber like you already have and give us more aerial and grounded combos and techniques. Keep us moving more, and if you want to mess with enemy placement like the ground dash does, at least keep us in range to keep attacking. And if you want to keep the big saw wheel, which I also think is cool, just turn it into an active charging hitbox like how the Doomsday detonator works in this game already. Charge it up, make it big, and fire it off. That would more than make up for having to make us stand still if it still does damage while charging, and having us jump and dash out of it for a quick evasion. If you honestly combine the Z-Saber and the X-Buster into one weapon, that would truly be interesting on its own. At the very least, let us have a constant close range and far range weapon like in the Zero games at all times. Once again, obtaining subroutines took another step forward with the Credit Edition's subroutines. So just make that a part of the base game. If you get a reward for good ranks, even casuals will end up caring about them. And make it easier to get more subroutines before you're able to beat the game as well. I know I said I got like 5 out of 20, but half of that was to get more money, so snake eating its own tail, you know? And I know I spoke on this before, but don't, big quotation marks, force people to play them for more story. We've left that behind. Don't bring that back. It's not worth it. You'll just make people end up resenting the story that they have, whether they get it or not, and that's not worth it. For a game series based around score, if people like it, they will replay it anyway, no matter what. I personally don't even think the story's good enough for a hard mode playthrough in the first place, but I know some people out there do care. Don't take away things they worked for, like subroutines, for this sense of challenge that doesn't help them learn the game. It's not that I'm against harder modes, I just think that taking things away isn't that fun. If you want that bare bones nothing only at the base challenge, just bring back Score Attack. You have all of these subroutines that some of them should be in the base game. Some of them completely ruin the engagement, some of them that actually help you cost way too much money, and then in the end you just end up throwing all of them away, so what's the point? But I guess all of this is my real gripe and frustration with this game overall. I see why they wanted all of these things, but when put together they all just clash and we end up with this game that feels confused in what it's trying to imitate. And I know what it's trying to imitate, and I know what it's trying to move away from, and this game doesn't understand the difference between those two ideas, and it's currently stuck between them. I feel like this game looked at Gunvolt 3 as an inspiration, and I hope that it somehow missed the mark at what that game is trying to do. But this spin-off series has a chance at being something truly special if it wants to continue forward with these ideas. I hope this is just growing pains of a change that what X becomes next is something very special. True first world problems when the video game series that you like has a new one and it disappoints you in almost every way. Well, what are you gonna do? Hopefully you all will join me again when we come back to Gunvolt, hopefully sometime this summer with Gunvolt 3. But if you did manage to watch this long, thank you. I hope you like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you think about this game. And until we meet again, mata ao. Until we meet again.